Week 8 is behind us, and we come to you on this Hallows Eve with a very spooky edition of Stat Chasing.
Pat Fryer Helmo.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight.
Jamar Alpha Play Chase.
Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally this boys. You're right.
Happy Halloween, Drico, and all of those of you in chat. I noticed that you're not in costume. I am, in fact, in costume. I am an irrationally exuberant Cowboys fan, which isn't that different than my everyday costume.
Yeah, I thought we were just gonna do Kirk Cousins on the header this week, and you're like, oh, can we do Ceedee Lamb? I'm like, oh god damn it, you're gonna make me talk about the Cowboys again.
Yeah, I mean, for every Ceedee Lamb, there is also a Tony Pollard. So we'll definitely have to talk about Tony. Of course, very sad with the slew of injuries again this week. Kirk Cousins out for the season. We get Tyrod Taylor with yet another rib injury / I believe, if I remember correctly, wasn't the Justin Herbert start because of a Tyrod Taylor rib injury, where he then got his lung punctured by the team doctor. So this guy has bad luck with ribs.
Yeah, rib cages have not treated him well.
But we did get Tommy DeVito to play some NFL quarterback snaps. So the NFL giveth and the NFL taketh away. But I'm sure that we will cover all of that during our charts, especially when we see Saquon Barkley's 382 touches in a single game. That's only slight exaggeration.
Let's get into these charts. And as always, we start off with QB passing and efficiency, efficiency and rushing production. And on the horizontal axis, we've got adjusted yards per attempt, which is like normal yards per attempt, but rewards touchdowns and punishes interceptions. And then on the vertical axis, we've got touchdown rate, self-explanatory, and then the size of the bubble corresponds to their rushing yardage per game. And so anybody, we sort of like, I feel like we're looking at a pretty stable chart every week. And I know we've been back and forth about maybe doing another chart to sort of like give additional takeaways. And anything sort of sticking out to you?
Yeah, good tease on a potential shakeup of the QB chart. We'll have to see when I can get around to coding up a new chart here. But I think we've got some good ideas there that might lead to an even more actionable quarterback chart with respect to fantasy. For right now, dealing with the old chart format, not a ton of big takeaways. I would say, we're starting to see Lamar, even after like not a great week here against the Cardinals, where Gus Edwards just ate up all the touchdown production. I would still say that, based on what we've seen Lamar do, based on where he's at the chart, I certainly see, you have those enormous ceiling games well within the range for Lamar. So if he continues to be underpriced or undervalued in, DFS or BR drafts or dog bowl drafts, he's one that seems like a good spot to attack. Typically in like the draft style formats, he's clustered in, if there's elite quarterbacks on the slate, Lamar goes with them. So I don't really think there's a huge pricing inefficiency there. There was in that week where I managed to take down a Miami seat, but the market quickly corrected that and said, oh yeah, Lamar Jackson should go basically 1, 2, 3, right with Mahomes and Hurts. The other one that I wanted to mention this week was Purdy. We saw, and he came down a little bit in TD rate here. His adjusted yards per attempt is still very high, but we've seen a couple. I don't want to like jump to conclusions and call them bad games from Purdy, but I don't really think there's a way around calling this most recent week a pretty bad week from him. Lots of lots of flavor and context to add to the performance, though, in that he was coming off of a concussion that he only had 6 days to get right from.
And he might have been concussed again during the game.
Yeah, yes. There have been some studies that people have done showing that players coming off concussion do see dips in production, and that tracks. I don't know about you, Drico. Whenever I have traumatic brain injuries, I'm typically just a little bit worse at everything right after.
Right. So, everything involving quick reactions, attention to detail, like brain shaking around my skull, not helpful for that.
Yeah, and this is going to get way too down narrative street to be actionable at all. But I do want to point at it as just a potential example of like what a concussed guy recovering from a TBI looks like versus someone who's got all their wits about him. When Brock Purdy is sitting there inside the 10-yard line with a wide open receiver in the end zone, he just needs to layer in a little touch pass, and instead he just throws a dart right into the arms of the defender, but 2 yards in front of him. That might be something where if he was, at full mental processing strength there, that's one where he's like, oh yeah, let's just layer this in. But instead he just rips it right into the defender for a really costly turnover. So yeah.
I think though, apart like that's like helpful, like that, like as a helpful reference to a play. When I'm thinking about this sort of statistically, what I'm saying is over a longer sample size, he's played quite well. Like the efficiency has been there, and oftentimes I find that the most advantageous situations, especially for quarterbacks, other positions too, but especially for quarterbacks, where you have a per game or two, and people have these explanations just lined up. Like they're so ready to believe, oh, Purdy is actually not that good. It's a Purdy pumpkin. And you have a longer sort of sample size. Now, we're through 8 games, so it's not like a vast sample size, but it's solid. It's half a season of sample size of Purdy playing well. That I do think that's sort of like if you see dips in ADP, ownership, pricing, Purdy, he's the type of quarterback where it's a little bit hard to get the true ceiling game, just because he is a pocket passer on an offense that likes to run the ball quite a lot. But he's that. I think he's definitely something where you can play a sort of vomit stack, maybe not quite vomit, and it can get there, but maybe even more actionably that I'm still really interested in San Francisco pass catchers, like because I know how strong this offense can be, and I'm not going to shy away because of 1 or 2 weak performances, and maybe that's sort of understood by most people, but if not, I think that's a pretty obvious example of a regression to the positive side candidate.
So you're looking at these last couple performances as more an aberration than anything, and you'd be willing to buy back in on Purdy here going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe I don't have like the sort of explanation where I know ball or whatever. I just know that I much prefer to rely on longer sample sizes, and I think human beings are too ready to believe patterns in smaller sample sizes, and I just think this is a pretty classic example where you're better off trusting the larger game sample.
Okay, that is fair. To play devil's advocate, I will say the things where Purdy is good are things like EPA that are going to be very systemic and more indicative of the offense as a whole, and not as much the individual player performance. And if we look at this offense historically and other quarterbacks that have operated in it, Jimmy Garoppolo also had a very good EPA.
I'm not trying to make a talent argument for Purdy, because like I understand all the things you're saying, where like the offense is set up to make him look good. The weapons that he has make him look good. So I'm not trying to say Purdy's a world beater, but in terms of fantasy, can you still get those 25, 30-point games that you're getting before? Like I don't see those as out of the picture. And I don't see the sort of go-go. I still see the go-go games from the 49ers where they just have so much talent that it explodes as very much on the table.
And I think that's probably the best point, and that's where I personally probably make too many negative assumptions about Purdy, where you're saying it doesn't matter for fantasy how good or bad he is. That you know what you're saying about, oh well, the offensive system is so good, yeah, and he gets to exist in that offensive system. Deal with it, buddy. Like, he's gonna keep crushing, and you're gonna keep crying if
Try harder, Lib.
Yeah, so I do think it was really important to discuss Purdy, though, just with this, this 3-week down stretch. I personally played a lot of Ayuk in the dog bowl. I tried to get over my anti-Purdy bias and say, yeah, it doesn't matter. The offense is so good, and I really leaned in heavily into Ayuk and Kittle. I shouted out Kittle as a good play in that format last week on the show, and that did pay off. But as far as other quarterbacks here, moving on in the chart, I'm interested. My big question is we've got some interesting guys sitting here at right around 7 yards per attempt. Trevor Lawrence, Derek Carr, Stafford's going to miss some time. Dak Prescott, all these guys sitting around here, where I feel like they're probably right around the same tier for fantasy. Of course, they're also right in line with Mahomes and Hurts, but I don't think that's anything that it'd be fair to lump these guys in with them.
Have you frozen? I don't know. We lost you for a second.
Okay.
The last thing we heard was he's hanging around Mahomes and Hurts, but I don't think that's.
No, I was finishing that thought up with, I don't think it's fair to lump them together, but of these guys of Dak, Lawrence, and Carr, do you have any interest in any of these three as potential positive regression candidates? We kind of saw Dak get there this week, but what about Lawrence and Carr going forward?
So I think I did call out Carr as as somebody who I thought could improve as the shoulder got better, and it does feel like, everybody's been talking like Derek Carr has played awful, like truly awful. But above 7 yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, that's pretty good to solid. And obviously you can see there that he's been getting the yardage but not the touchdowns. So that's something where I still feel good about that having an improvement. And maybe it's how we talked about where Chris Olave always has these he's been having these high air yards that haven't been converted, and if those pay off, then you can see a huge explosion game for the two of them. Trevor Lawrence, that's an interesting one where some of the peripheral sort of like big time throw stats, sort of stuff like that, have said this guy is playing great, but his receivers just keep dropping the ball. That's interesting in that, like, the receivers only really need to put it together for one game for that game to be awesome. But at the same time, do you I guess I'm asking you this. Do you think it's sort of fair that Trevor Lawrence is that's just his situation right now, where he gets let down by the talent around him, where it's a lot of not quite elite receivers, not quite number one receivers?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily, from the games from what I've watched, and I don't really feel like Lawrence is getting let down a ton by his receivers. There's certainly some drops where, if those get converted, all of a sudden his numbers look a whole lot better. I also think that he might be running just a little bit poor as far as his own stats for all the touchdowns that ETN is scoring, right? If ETN is taking all those touchdowns off the table for the offense, then Trevor Lawrence is just going to look a little bit worse. And so I did want to bring up Carr and Lawrence just because I think, and really Stafford kind of is in the same group with them for the reason of, hey, we saw Kyren Williams run super hot on touchdowns for the start of the season. And again, this data is through the entire season up to now. So it takes a couple games to really move the needle for these guys. So I do, we're going to miss time on Stafford, but I do think Carr and Lawrence are potentially some interesting targets going forward. I'm actually just looking up right now. Oh, bummer. Yeah, I couldn't remember if the Jags had played the Colts twice already, or if they still had one more Colts game, and they have played them twice already. So that's a shame. I was looking for a Jags Colts matchup where we might get a Trevor Lawrence explosion, but yeah, we're gonna have to wait for. I mean, geez, there's really not.
The matchups aren't favorable.
It looks like Week 17, which, if you remember, is all that matters. Week 17, where they get the Panthers. Maybe that's the spot where we get the T-Law eruption. Derek Carr, as far as like an eruption spot, always just feels like a tiny bit thinner to me to have those eruption games, purely from the Taysom Hill touchdown equity vulture phenomenon, right? Like could Derek Carr easily have a game where he throws for 403? Yeah, absolutely. Like, we see it in the air yard stats to Olave. Like, Shaheed is getting average depth of target of 50 for he's going crazy. Like, if Carr runs hot one week, like, he could for sure have a monster week.
Smoke.
Yeah. You're concerned that you're also fading that Taysom Hill doesn't come in and steal a big chunk of that production, because he's very live to it every week. So I do like that. I think that it does, depress people's perception of Carr too, just having that Taysom variable in there. So he's one that's sneaky to me.
Right, but he's played by the numbers. He's played well. Whereas most people, I feel like the perception is that he's playing awful.
Yeah, which is strange to me. And I hear people calling, not to call out Silva, but on the Establish a Show on Friday, Silva's calling Carr a pussy. And I'm thinking, the guy tore his AC joint, or sprained his AC joint.
Right.
And
played 2 days later or something.
Yeah. I don't know that that's a pussy, man. That's like a guy who's gritting it out for the team. Here's an interesting thing that I wish that I had time to look into this, but maybe you can shed some light on this for me. Adjusted yards per attempt, that's not going to be negatively impacted by guys that are throwing the ball away, right? Like, a throwaway isn't counted in there in your adjusted yards per attempt. Is that correct?
No, I should know it. I am pretty sure that it does count as a.
It does. Okay. I was wondering, what if I can look at the Derek Carr stats as a split, and I just remove the million Alvin Kamara 0-yard ADOT checkdowns, and then I look at his adjusted yards per attempt without all of those little tiny Kamara dink and dunks in there. Not that they're not going to happen. They're still going to happen. But I feel like
hold on a second. They're not included. They are included. Yes, they are included.
They are included. Okay.
Yeah, I was right. So there's a PFS stat for aimed passes that would correct for that, and maybe we should make that adjustment going forward.
Yeah, wondering if we extricate the Kamara dink and dunk stuff, how Carr looks as a passer, because I do think that may be skewing his adjusted yards per attempt a little bit. And again, not that those aren't going to happen, but just to get more of an understanding of, this is a guy he's pushing the ball down the field. He's chucking it deep to Olave, he's chucking it deep to Shaheed. And I'm looking at their schedule here. We've got Saints Bears, Saints Vikings, Saints Falcons, Saints Panthers, Saints Giants. Oh my! So I don't know. I'm feeling a buy signal for Derek Carr. I don't know if that's too hot a take for you, but to me, with the way the schedule looks and the public perception of him, I think he might be undervalued.
I think he's a pretty classic example, pocket passer, where he doesn't rush, and obviously the offense isn't perfect, so he's not going Mahomes every week. But does he have the 300 plus yards and 3 touchdowns in him in any given week? He certainly, and that is something where, at a really depressed price, wins you money.
Yeah. Don't need to spend a ton more time here on the quarterback chart. The last one we need to shout out, though, before we move on, is Kirk Cousins, who is making his Viking funeral appearance on this chart as he tore his Achilles this week. Very tragic. Kirk was having a career year, leading the league in completions, believe tied with Tua for first in the league in total touchdowns. Just the guy was crushing. I mean, with or without Justin Jefferson, Kirk was balling this season, and he's a really easy guy to want to root for. He's a little bit of a goofy character, but I mean, he seems like a good person, and it definitely makes you sad to see a guy like that lose a season of injury. So, got to pour some out for our boy Kirk here.
Yeah. Rooting for him to make a big comeback next year. Come back prior to the year, hopefully.
Oh, that would be great. All right, let's move on to running backs, unless you've got any other quarterbacks you wanted to touch on.
No. Covered who I thought were covering. And I need to zoom out a little. There we go. And so this is our running back snaps and usage chart. And this part of it deals exclusively with sort of starters, or at the very least, sort of 1As. And what we have here is rush attempts, routes, pass blocks, and run blocking, all expressed as a percentage of team total play. And so when you stack these bars on top of each other, you see what percentage of the offense's plays this running back was on the field for. And then you can see the sort of flavor for how much of that was rushing attempts, how much of it was routes, how much was pass blocking. And so we sort of covered this. We sort of cover what this chart is every week. But one thing that I think I haven't sort of emphasized, and maybe not emphasized enough, is the reason we look at stuff like routes in something like this over targets is because when barring a couple of very elite sort of receiving running backs, when a running back gets a target, it's usually, more often than not, it's because where the offense wanted to put the ball, it wasn't open. And so either the blitz got home too quickly, or they were covered, and it's like, okay, we're not going to be able to push the ball down the field this play, so let's hit our check down. And the main thing honestly for that is, in terms of usage, is that you're on the field, that you're actually running the check down. And a huge component of converting those check downs into targets, it is luck for all but the very best of route runners. Like your Christian McCaffrey, who can run all these routes that gets open and is a trusted part of the receiving offense. He obviously, his ability to get targets is skill, but a lot of players, converting routes into targets, it's a big luck component.
Good summary, and definitely I think good clarification on why we're displaying routes here over targets. One guy that I wanted to bring up here was Javonte Williams, who we are seeing trend up the chart. I mean, this to me, it kind of seems like the entire thesis. Javonte's down near the bottom, right around Achan and Pacheco. You can identify him with a really large percentage. If you look at the other green sections of the bar for all the backs, like, you can see how much of his usage is coming from rush attempts. So when he's on the field, they are pretty keen on putting the ball in his belly. It seems really silly. I know there's been narrative of Sean Payton might not know, like, he wasn't familiar with Javonte and admitted as much. He's like, oh yeah, didn't know how good this guy was until we self-scouted during the bye, and didn't realize Marvin Mims wasn't getting on the field as much or whatnot. I don't know how much of that is actually real, or how much of that is just like, hey, isn't it LOL Sean Payton bad? Like, isn't that funny? But to me, this kind of looks like signal that Javonte is establishing himself as the preferred back. Granted, it is still a three-headed monster, but I think the direction that it's trending is Javonte will become the usable one, and then it's looking like P. Ryan and Jaleel McLaughlin will both basically be unusable contingent value type plays going forward. But wanted to highlight Javonte as he creeps his way up the chart here.
I think that's a great call there. And also interesting in that context is that he is coming off the ACL injury. And so as the season wears on and as the knee becomes in better and better shape, I think that's an easy trend to buy, where this is sort of like, if you're thinking about your prior expectations, you would have expected Javonte to get an increasingly higher command of the offensive touch share, and so it definitely makes sense that it's signal for that to be happening.
The other I guess split backfield situation that I wanted to touch on was we have Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor, where Jonathan Taylor just starts crushing in the first half and then goes basically radio silent in the second half of the game. Zach Moss still more involved than Jonathan Taylor managers would like. Even when Zach Moss was coming off of a week where he was a true game time decision with injury. So really weird to me for Moss to hang on to so much of that work. Not sure if you think that that's something that's sticky going forward. Is he just going to be a thorn in Jonathan Taylor's side for the rest of the season? Is it going to progress in the direction that Jonathan Taylor managers would want?
It reminds me of you know what it really reminds me of? It reminds me of when it was Jonathan Taylor and Hayden Hines, where JT would be clearly even though Hines was good, JT is clearly the better back, should be getting the touches, and it just took longer for that to get established than we're expecting. So obviously, Zach Moss is a thorn in JT's side for now, but I feel like that's a really fragile set of circumstances where and I guess this is just my opinion. My opinion is that JT is sort of like barring health is a future Hall of Famer, and Zach Moss just is not. Even though he's playing well right now, he is playing well right now, and I just think that it's just sort of an inevitability that JT does just elevate himself. Where yes, we just, the way we win is we give this guy the ball, and that's not happening right now. That's frustrating, and there's definitely some possibility where it doesn't happen, but I do think it's overwhelmingly likely that by the end of the year, and obviously I don't know when, that it is a JT show in that backfield.
So allow me to put a hot take in your mouth. Are you saying that because JT missed games to start, has had a little bit of a lackluster fantasy production, in his first few games back, having to split with Moss, he may be a really low-owned piece come time for best ball playoffs, and in week 17, JT against the Raiders may be the guy you need?
I think that if we're going down Nardo Street, I find that one really easy to believe.
Okay, I'm going to hold you to that one. Drico has said you can't win the $3 million without Jonathan Taylor. You heard it here first. Everyone hold him to it.
True. And you've got the stat chasing guarantee on that.
Absolutely.
If it doesn't come true, the ship chasing will refund whatever money you lose on that advice.
Yep.
Just email Pete and he'll get you.
Yeah, if you do in fact make the finals with a JT team and you do not win $3 million, I believe Pete and Pat are both eligible or on the line for refunding you your $3 million that you should have had. Moving on to other running backs near the bottom of the chart here. This was a bottom of the chart kind of week in my opinion, as far as guys where we had important stuff to talk about. But that's Gus Edwards and Darrell Henderson. So I'll start with Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards really demonstrated this week my entire thesis on why I really wanted to hammer Justice Hill this offseason, because I felt like this offense might be really good and they are just going to get a lot of opportunities to score the football. And I just want, explosive players on the offense. And I thought that Justice Hill may be able to work in there for some green zone touches. Turns out they really think Justice Hill is just a satellite back. Gus Edwards is definitely, on those goal line attempts or those short plunges, it's definitely Gus Edwards is preferred. And the biggest painful part for me for that is at the start of the season when J.K. Dobbins was still healthy for the entire 15 minutes that he was, they did take Dobbins out of the game and give Justice Hill those green zone and goal line touches. They were trying to make Justice Hill a thing, and it just at this point doesn't look like he's ever going to be the thing that the Justice Hill truthers want him to be. You're basically sitting here. I mean, shoot, even with a Gus Edwards injury, I think you're just shit out of luck. It's never going to be able to be the Justice Hill show. If you have a roster like ours in the stat chasing main event where you're just up a creek for running back points, Justice Hill can get you 6 a week, but I do think Gus Edwards is that thesis playing out of sometimes the touchdowns don't go through the passing game in this offense, and the offense is high powered enough that you want those pieces. And we're seeing Gus, he's crept onto this starters chart now. He's getting more opportunities. He is kind of like a trap back. He's not getting a lot of passing game work. But the touchdown opportunities are really what drives his value there. So any thoughts on Gus Edwards?
He's definitely getting touchdown looks. I don't know. I don't like it, but he definitely seems like the last couple of weeks, the opportunity share for Gus Edwards has gone up quite a bit, and the last 2 weeks in particular, he's actually played quite well. And I guess it's running back if it short term, like 1 or 2 week running back efficiency can be so volatile that there is a part of me that's hesitant to just say, listen, this is the Gus Edwards show, and it's his backfield to lose because he's getting the share and he's playing so well. Like, I think that's true right now, but it can be true for 2.5 more months, all the way through the end of the regular season. That does feel a little tough. I don't know if the whole thing, the whole season is decided for the backfield yet, but definitely been disappointing for Justice Hill, and definitely need a couple of things to break your way for that thesis to work out. And I guess what's the actionable takeaway in that? We're not taking Justice Hill in the dog bowl. In shorter benches, he's probably not rosterable. He obviously is for our extreme 0 RB squad in the main event, but is he still probably a back where, because the offense is good, he still has a good bit of potential value? I think that's still true, but definitely don't feel nearly as good about it as we did when we were bidding $600 on him, $5 on him in week 2.
Yeah, absolutely. I just, to me, the way I see it playing out is, let's say both Gus and Justice stay totally healthy the rest of the season. The Ravens have kind of told us, like, we like deploying Justice Hill in this specific way, and it's that specific way. It's not a lot of volume. They want to use him. He looks good too when he touches the ball, and he got a.
And they're like, great. That means we're using him right.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't really fault them for that. He's not such a big bodied guy. Maybe he truly can't hold up to that workload. But anyway, thought that was important just on the back of the monster game that Gus Edwards had this week to provide a little clarity in that situation. A week where it wasn't a monster performance, but there is relevance here for fantasy, especially with Matt Stafford likely going to miss the game. We're looking at Darrell, Henderson, and Royce Freeman chopping up a backfield here. And while Henderson did get more opportunities overall, I think it was a lot closer than the market anticipated. And it really looks like it's basically a true split between Henderson and Freeman, with Henderson having a little bit of an edge in the passing game. Do you think that's a fair assessment of the situation?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And the only thing that, and maybe this is a debate, maybe we need to talk about it. My sort of gut reaction when I see that Matt Stafford isn't playing is that, like, oh shit, I actually don't want the running backs now, because he's such a, he's so important for the offense that him not playing means that the overall pie could just shrink them dramatically.
I definitely agree. I agree with you 100% there. I think it's more for people that are in dire straits for running back. It might be a break glass in case of emergency. And so let's give a couple comparisons. Let's say you're staring down Darrell Henderson or Amari DiMercato. Who are you rolling with this week?
Yeah, probably Henderson, just because there's definitely that they're probably similar situations where they have sort of not full. There's other backs hanging around, but then Arizona, they're going to start Clayton Tune, so it's like you really need a really high share, and for things to break your way, for DeMarcado to get there. Whereas, I don't know, maybe the Rams have shown that they can at least put up some games of production with Stafford out. That maybe Henderson is slightly better, but that does feel I don't feel confident in that at all. That feels pretty close.
Here's a gross one: Ramondre Stevenson or Darrell Henderson.
Ooh, that's tough, isn't it? Because like Ramondre is like third or fourth round pick, but hasn't played well. Offense has been quite bad at times. Like you sort of do have to say Ramondre, just because if you're putting any weight on your priors, like they obviously lean him dramatically, but if you're talking qualitatively and quantitatively about the situations, they don't sound that much different.
Right? Yeah, Ramondre is losing work to Zeke Elliott, or and
the Patriots might have considered trading Mac Jones, but they didn't. Like, nobody called. We're like, no, you're good. You can have him. You can keep him. Not great there at all.
The only other guy that I had where I wanted to bring him up, and he's more near the top of the chart, is Saquon, who had just absurd usage on the back of Tommy DeVito out there, and the Giants refusing to pass the ball. That just wanted to highlight the absolute crazy amount of usage that Saquon got this week. And you know what? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Jahmyr Gibbs, who has snuck into the second spot as far as best usage profile in the league.
I should say that's 2 games.
Yeah, because
we're as sort of regular listeners will remember, we do this on a 4-week sort of rolling average, and he wasn't. There was either a bye or he wasn't available for the other 2. So that is a sample size of 2 games, and obviously 2 monster games, but important context, I think.
Yes, yeah, very, very good to clarify that. But yeah, I mean, really, it's just, and this is something where last night on the showdown slate, ETR had Gibbs projected for like an absurd amount of points. It was like 21.1, and then they brought it down to 21.0. And Run the Sims also had Gibbs for just a disgusting amount. Like, looking at the projection, I'm like, this is wrong. It doesn't even matter how good the player is. Like, the base median projection is not like, because I think Run the Sims was even higher. It was like 23 or something. It just like, this is not a base projection. Like, I'm sorry, something's messed up in your inputs. And for Run the Sims, they had crazy play volume for the Lions. Turns out it all played out that exact way. where those crazy projections came to fruition for Gibbs. And so I think my big takeaway there is just the Lions backfield produces such an absurd amount of opportunity and expected fantasy points that if it's a game that they're remotely in, it's just it's kind of like the Dolphins running backs, right? Like you play Dolphins running backs, you also play Lions running backs. And of course, when you get Montgomery in there and the work's going to be a little more split, then it's less attractive. But I do think that we're going that direction for the Dolphins as well, whereas, Jeff Wilson Jr. and Ahmed are working in and you get a Chan back. It's going to be more of, hey, these guys are less reliable week in and week out for these monster games where it condenses on one guy, when there's people missing due to injury or whatnot. But still assets you love to have in best ball because those blow up games can come. Still guys that if they're, available at low ownership or depressed prices in DFS, you like to play them just because they're on a great offense. So really it's just, again, not to go back to the there's offenses you want and there's offenses that you don't want point that we've talked about on the show before. But yeah, it looks
I think that is a great point where the Lions are clearly very fantasy rich environment all round.
Yeah.
I do think it's worth calling out that there's this Twitter page called the Coach Speak Index, and they sort of look at the different trends, which coaches say things, and then what they say actually translate, and sort of what's the rate of that. And the Dan Campbell for workload stuff, if he says it in the season, hey, this guy is going to get the ball, that guy gets the ball. And they sort of like flagged that when he said something along the lines of, I'd love to say we're going to spill him or whatever, but no, we really need him to play. He's going to play a lot. And I'm sure that was at least a part of the big projections for Jahmyr, where, like you said, it is a great offense to be a part of. And then when David Montgomery is out, he sort of is a clear, far and away bell cow. I do think it'll be interesting to see what the split will be when David Montgomery comes back. Because on the one hand, they love David Montgomery. And they've made these comments in the past where like they see him as the guy who can take the load and he can take the punishment, and Jahmyr Gibbs is their change of pace. But there's also a thing where they can't put the genie back in the bottle, where they have given Jahmyr Gibbs the rock, and he has done he's played well. So it's like they can't really say that anymore, that he's just this race car that they don't want to use a sedan or whatever.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a situation to monitor going forward, but just always err on the side of playing your Lions. The Lions look like a great offense. Let's move on to our backups chart here.
Yeah. So it's the same chart, except this, as you can see, these are people with 25 to 40% of routes plus rush attempts.
Aaron Jones it might take him a couple of weeks to get up there, but he's going to get back to the starters chart sooner than later. He finally got, I believe, was he above 50% snaps this week, but finally working in for more work. I think on the flip side of offenses you want to have, the Packers are an offense you do not want to have. They look bad. Just like plain and simple, the Packers don't seem like an offense that I want a part of.
But yeah, you're right. Aaron Jones, 50% snap rate, 40% useful, sort of 11% rush attempts, 29% routes. But I agree where that offense is pretty abysmal, and you sort of need, if a guy is going to play in that offense and produce, they need to get the touchdown. And there's usually not that many to go around.
they were sellers here at the trade deadline. And so to me, I mean, not that this is very different than they've already been operating, but to me, I would wonder if that means that we see even more opportunities for, their rookie players or guys that they just don't know exactly what they have. Maybe we see the backfield get shaken up a little bit and we get some of those guys mix it in who's, third and fourth down the depth chart just to see what they have. Cause they clearly, they're not a big fan of what they've got in AJ Dillon. Aaron Jones is not long for this league. So the Packers have a void to fill at running back. I wouldn't be surprised if later in the season we see some of these younger guys mix in. Patrick Taylor, is that their third guy, if I'm remembering correctly?
Yeah. He's the Green Bay guy. He's 25. So not, but I think he was a rookie last year.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised. There. Oh, and he does show up here on the chart as well. I didn't even need
he does. Yeah, so
off the top of the head.
Undrafted free agent in 2020. For Green Bay Packers, he was on the New England practice squad. As of hold on a second here. This just says 2 weeks ago the New England Patriots signed him to their practice squad.
Sniped him away. And so that leaves, gosh, who's that other back that they had work in there? Anyway, wouldn't be surprised.
He played he last played for the Packers week 5. So that's
long and short of it, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Packers kick the tires on a couple of their deeper on the depth chart running backs, continue to mix in all of their young wide receivers, get the random Samare Toure looks in here and there, see what they've got in their 2 young tight ends that they've drafted. I mean, we've already seen a good amount of run for Musgrave, but anyway, other running backs on this backup chart, we mentioned Royce Freeman a little bit already. No one else I really had a ton of, new takeaway on. Did you have anyone else you wanted to talk about here?
I think it's sort of a little bit interesting that Kareem Hunt is still quite low. That does make me think that Jerome Ford is still the back to own in Cleveland.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there. And the fact that they rushed Ford back from allegedly what they call a mild high ankle sprain, which does not confuse
the lowest grade high ankle sprain you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah, whatever, man. Whatever we're doing with that. But yeah, the fact that they rushed him back, it's clear to me that the reason that they didn't have Hunt on the roster to start the season was they knew he was washed. They didn't like having him on the field last season, and he's purely here out of necessity now. Maybe if Pierre Strong, I don't know that Pierre Strong could really usurp Kareem Hunt for anything, but I mean, I'd still keep an eye out for it. But yeah, the most relevant takeaway is Jerome Ford is still the 1A there. And as far as backs to own and play, that's the one that you're really wanting to do. The other guys that I actually have takeaways on here are guys that I think are going to be better to point out on the efficiency chart. So,
okay. Yeah. Let's move on. So we've got the running backs expected points and efficiency chart. So it's rushing expected points on the horizontal, receiving expected points on the vertical, and the size of the bubble corresponds to efficiency. And like we mentioned on the prior chart, this is rolling 4 week. So week 5 through week 8. And I'm sorry, I did interrupt you there.
No, you were good. I was trying to rush to the podium to capitulate because you were super right last week when you were trying to talk me off of some potential positive regression for Dameon Pierce. And maybe it was just the rumors about the knee. Maybe he's going to be fully healthy after the bye and they just give him a full 20 carry workload. Nope. It's 100% exactly as you called it. It is Devin Singletary is just the guy that Devin Singletary could absolutely show up to any coach that he's ever played for's house and take his daughter out on a date. They just love something about Devin Singletary. He's a good man because coaches love him. And it's not that Pierce has been anything special that he's should be keeping Singletary off the field. But yeah, this backfield is for me, like in any kind of format where I'm needing that high single week upside, complete stay away. I will not touch Pierce. I will not touch Singletary in any kind of like tournament type setting where I need the upside. The only way you're getting there is just fluky touchdown luck for either.
Here's a crazy stat and something that blows my mind a little bit. So for the backfield of Houston in week 8, the expected points for every running back for Houston was 29.3, but the highest expected point for any individual player was 10.4 for Dameon Pierce. So that's 10.4 Dameon Pierce, 9 Devin Singletary, and then something called an Andrew Beck 7.9, Mike Boone 2.6. Like it's pretty wild that it just split that much.
What if I told you I've played some Andrew Beck on Denver showdown slates last season when he was a tight end for them?
I mean, sounds like a smart showdown play.
It was. He was running hot on touchdowns last season. But yeah, when I saw him vulture that Dameon Pierce touchdown, and I had some Dameon Pierce in the dog bowl, I was like, this is just fucking perfect. Andrew Beck comes back to haunt me an entire season later. Because I remember I had a couple buddies, I was saying, like, I'm pretty sure Beck's the skeleton key to this showdown slate. Everyone wants to play Dulcich. I'm jamming in Beck. Like, this is great. Insane leverage, low owned. I'm solo shipping millies. And then Beck does nothing the week that I try to get on him. And then, of course, this week where I try to play Dameon Pierce for the first time, like, ever in my life, Beck vultures a touchdown for him. So that was, like, it was just poetic. Sometimes the universe does stuff like that where it's just beautiful. You couldn't script it any better.
Well, I'm sure there'll be zero hesitancy to play him in showdown the next opportunity.
Yeah, I won't X him out of the pool. How about that? On this chart, though, the true like star absolute king that we have to talk about, and it literally makes me sick to say anything positive about this guy because he's a deplorable human. He should be in jail. He's a piece of shit. Attempted murderer, Alvin Kamara. But the role for fantasy, where he is effectively a proxy for random number generation for us, he sure do generate the random numbers high. So, I mean, yeah, like he's getting touchdowns. He's getting involved in the passing game. Early, when he had first come back, we had a huge skew to where so much of his value is coming in receiving expected points. Now it's normalized more to where he's just so game script proof. It's like it's everything you want out of a running back. Just incredible role. I'm down extremely bad because I have like no Kamara in best ball. I just refused to draft him. Thought the suspension could be way worse. Really went heavy on the Kendre bags. But yeah, he's an elite fantasy option going forward just purely because of the role. It doesn't even matter that he's not so hyper efficient on the ground.
You think he's a first round pick if we redraft today?
Yeah, as stupid as it like late, like into first. Yeah, the role is so good. It's like because the Saints are at least a functional offense where they're like scoring. They do this thing where they like accumulate yards and score touchdowns. Whereas like the other guy with this kind of role,
is he skinny Leonard Fournette?
Skinny. Yeah. He's skinny, like slightly less dusty Leonard Fournette. I think that's probably an apt comparison. But I was getting to Saquon Barkley has like a similar role. He doesn't have as good a passing game role as Kamara, but he's getting so many carries. But the offense is so trash, it doesn't matter. Like,
right?
It's so crazy that you could have a role that Saquon has and not just smash every single week. But yeah, Saquon Barkley is like if not priced up, like your dream cash game DFS running back option. You're just going to touch the ball a billion times, and you're like, well, he can't goose me. He's good for 12 to 14 no matter what. But yeah, those guys have insane roles.
Yeah, it is anytime you see a role with over 20 expected points per game, it's definitely goes without saying very, very good for fantasy. I do wonder though, and push back, if you will, isn't the sort of like the idea of the elite running backs is the legendary upside, as our friend and Mothership podcast guy Packer Rain says, and the legendary upside season does require a good efficiency where it's like 10 expected points in the receiving, 10 expected points in rushing, and then 5 points over expected, and over the big game sample, that's how it happens. So I think for Kamara, where he's going, clearly you're getting a great outcome. But him and Barkley, I am pretty hesitant to say that they can both deliver sort of like the true, like, grind your face into the dirt season.
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely would agree with you on Barkley. I just don't see it. He would just have to one-man team it, like Saquon Barkley's breakaway touchdowns every game for him to get to a legendary type of season. And for Kamara, for me, what I would push back on is, you're right that he's not getting there in the traditional legendary profile that Pat's outlined, but he's getting there because his expected points are 12 and 12. It's not 10 and 10 with efficiency. It's 12 and 12 with mediocre efficiency. And so I would be very surprised if Kamara puts up in even if we just say from rest of season to end of season, we throw out the games he's already had and throw out the suspension. I would still be very surprised if he gets to like the true legendary 23 point per game threshold in full PPR. But like we saw in past seasons where no running back gets there to that legendary threshold, this is probably, like Christian McCaffrey could get there this season. But otherwise, like, is there anyone else that you really see? Is anyone actually live for a legendary season for the entire season first, and then let's truncate that to the remainder?
Other than CMC, what about Travis Etienne?
That's a good question. Let's put a pin in that one till we get to the next chart, because I want to use the expected points. To kind of look at that. But then before we move to this next chart, let's talk about, and for the remainder of the season, is there anyone that you think could have the pace that would be legendary if they were to do it over the entire season?
On this chart, I think Breece Hall could get there for sure.
Yes, I am leading the witness to Breece Hall.
It's like the rest of the year, focus on this chart. He's right in the middle.
Look at the guy right next to CMC with the big dot. Yeah. No, that was my assessment too, though. Earnestly, I think that if we were going to redo the draft, that's actually a good question. We redo the draft right now. It's the end of the first round. CMC's gone already. He's 101, 102, right? But it's Breece Hall and Kamara after all the big receivers and Travis Kelce are off the board. You're into the first round. Who are you taking between Kamara or Breece?
Yeah, easily Breece. Like I'm like I would obviously have to play the ADP game, but I like if it was a rest of season from here, week 9 out, I would be like thinking to myself, I should be taking Breece Hall here, like even in like the first 6 picks. Just
and then would you be Kamara or Barkley? Let's say you're second round or even.
I think it is Kamara over Barkley there for sort of the reasons you've outlined there, where he's got the functional offense, he's got the nicer receiving role, and sort of more game script matchup proof, just because they want to involve him so much in their offense in all these various different ways.
And then just to touch on Jacobs really quick, because Jacobs is like Diet Kamara right now because he's bad. He's not actually good at running the football, which some people say running backs should be good at running the football, but he's been atrocious in pretty much any metric that you look at there. But he has been receiving targets in the passing game, really, and you did see it last night. Like when the Raiders are down, I mean, the offense was entirely non-functional last night, but I don't know that that's going to be very different going forward for the rest of the season for the Raiders. But when they're down and they don't have guys getting open downfield, the Jacobs safety valve is like, that is the Jimmy G special. Like, let me throw it to Jacobs here and not take a negative play. I'm trying to think of what the situation was. I want to say it was a fourth down. It might have been fourth down.
Oh, yeah. It was like 4th and 7 or something, and he threw a check down.
It's like 5 yards short with no
Yeah.
green grass. Like, the only way Jacobs was getting a first down is if he like picked up the defender and carried him with him across the
Right.
for 5 yards. I laughed out loud at that.
Had no chance of working.
God bless Jimmy G, the funniest man on the football field.
I'm moving my pendulum or my meter is moving from, I'm looking at the long-term data and I'm sort of suspecting that he's not very good and that he's not going to be very good. And the more games I get where he just doesn't play well overall, the more I'm like, okay, last year was an aberration. The role is good, but when the offense is bad and the player is bad, then it's sort of like it almost doesn't matter for the role. That like, he's a pretty classic, typical dead zone back.
So would you say last year Jacobs was the savior of the slappies in that, not a good profile, didn't look to be a good back. Probably the argument for the Jacobs drafters to not be called slappies was his price eventually got depressed to the point where it wasn't a slappy pick to take him. But
yeah, it was a sharp pick by the end, for sure.
Could you draw a parallel between Jacobs and Adam Thielen this year, where you also were in fact a slappy if you're selecting Adam Thielen, but by the end of the summer where he was so pushed down, it probably was correct to fill up on your Thielen shares there?
Yeah. Thielen is a little bit trickier because anytime you have these kind of like second team receivers, and this sort of speaks to, I like to think of it as like I guess result versus process, whereas obviously the result for Thielen is very, very good, but even at the cheap price, somebody like Thielen, who was clearly he was and is at the tail end of his career, and those guys, almost no matter how cheap they are, unless they were once a truly elite player, then I think the roster spot, honestly, the opportunity cost of the roster spot is a very important consideration with those older players and receivers. So I don't think fading Thielen was bad, even knowing the result, because I think that if you were to replay that over and over, I don't know that your like expected outcomes are bad by not taking him.
So do you think?
I don't think there's an applicable lesson.
To put a bow on it and maybe be the applicable lesson, missing on players like Jacobs and Thielen, now that we've got 2 seasons where we've got these guys that are just smashing absolute league winners at cost, but you're saying that missing on those players is the cost of doing business as a thoughtful drafter that's optimizing for the right things. Yeah, for sure. And the other part of it is that like, you're never like, we're humans. None of us are. You're kind of a machine, but most people aren't machines. And the idea of like you're gonna have the perfect draft every draft, and you're
your ownership levels are just going to be perfectly calibrated to perfect. It's not real. Like that's not a realistic goal for anybody. What you're trying to do is even if you're trying to play exploitatively and pick your players and try to get to 20% exposure on lots of guys, all you're trying to do is make sure that your exposure levels are better than the field. You're just trying to beat 8 for everybody, and you can miss on big smashes and still be better than the field just because you're also passing on the huge busts. And I think too, especially when you're playing tournaments, there's a lot of like luck involved in that. You can miss on players, but if you can build one squad where you hit on a bunch of players, you hit on the right players and the right amount of players across that team, then it's like you've done your job. You've got your super team. You get to the final, and you roll the dice and you go from there. So maybe that was a bit of a long explanation, but
I think that was a really good explanation. And it's more about the pursuit of the one roster it all comes together on than the individual exposures of getting to say that, well, I got a bunch of Adam Thielen and he's doing so good. It's like, yeah, well, all your teams look like shit because you're a donkey.
Right. And I mean, like you can still say, hey, I want to target this exposure. I want that exposure. But just don't, I guess, like you're saying, don't sort of victory lap one exposure because it's across the whole thing. But then also don't kill yourself if something that you weren't on works out. Like maybe you do need to reevaluate, and there is a lessons in learning from data, but not always. I feel like not always.
Okay, let's move on to our second expected fantasy points chart here for running backs.
So in this same chart, and people often say, oh, hey, you don't have so-and-so in your chart. And we're like, oh, no, he was on the other one. And you're probably better at me explaining how we like separate these two charts out.
Yeah, so what we did just for readability, because if I combined all of the players on one chart, it would just be a complete mess of colorful chickenpox of dots where you couldn't read anything. So what we do is we order the players based on their expected fantasy points, their total between the rushing and receiving. We order them in a list, and then we split them into two sets, the odd set and the even set, where the odd set is the players ranked 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc. Even set is 2, 4, 6, 8, etc. We split them up into two charts. That way you get a nice mix of guys that are going to fall in the different bands of each chart. So it makes them easier to read across. And so on this chart, we see Jahmyr Gibbs emerging in that extreme elite alpha role like Kamara and Barkley had. Again, this is only that 2 games of data that we've got for Gibbs, just the way that the rolling 4 weeks have worked out for him. But I really think that it goes to show, because between Gibbs and Craig Reynolds, who Craig Reynolds on the last chart was in that 5 to 10 expected fantasy point band, but between Gibbs and Reynolds, you're looking at like damn near 30 expected fantasy points for the team. And so that's a backfield where I'm very interested in having pieces of that, just like we talked about with Miami in previous weeks. Mm-hmm. But yeah, very important to monitor when Montgomery gets back. How does the workload shift? I just think with either of these backs, like for best ball, you're going to be, if you had Jahmyr Gibbs, even at the 4th round cost that he was going at, you're going to be happy because of the spike weeks that he's already been able to deliver. And if you have David Montgomery, you're going to be happy because of the raw points and spike weeks he's delivered at a depressed cost. So both great picks there. A guy that I wanted to talk about going forward, and also to go back on what you had said as far as ETN. So you mentioned ETN as a potential legendary type of season here. And so we see in the rushing, he can get that, right? Like his expected points per game on the rushing side is elite. He's at that, right about 12 expected points per game, which is really, one of the highest marks out there in the league. You got Ken Walker maybe a little bit ahead of him, but his involvement in the receiving game as far as his expected points per game is lacking a little bit there to get to that true, absolute
He's not
legendary
getting the
season.
double.
Yeah. And I don't think that it's for lack of opportunity. He's running more routes this season. And so what I would say is he's like right on that borderline of he probably can't give you a legendary season this year. But for me, it's a guy where, whenever he's either overlooked by the field or undervalued, underpriced, whatever it is, that's a back where you should be really happy to play him. Now, this last week, for reference, in the Dog Bowl, he was at the beginning of the week, he was, the second back off the board after only CMC. And that was a spot where I'm willing to pass on the price because you could get guys like Kamara and Breece Hall and Saquon later and not have to pay such a premium there. But I would say when the roles are reversed and when you have ETN going behind that cohort of guys, it just becomes a price game. Just know like what type of back he is. Like, for example, just in a vacuum, let's say that Saquon and ETN in a future Dog Bowl draft are going right back to back to each other. Who would you prefer in that scenario?
If it's Saquon or ETN, it's ETN all day.
Yeah, right. And so it's just knowing like to be price sensitive on him, and when he's in that cohort of guys that belong with him as far as expected fantasy points,
saying don't take him
day.
alongside CMC.
Right. Yeah. Don't take him alongside
CMC is just going to beat the piss out of him.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about the guys who have elite roles, but they don't have his talent and efficiency, then he's an easy bet over them.
Thank you. Much more succinct way of saying what I was rambling towards.
No, that was I thought was helpful for me as well because it helped me better frame how to think about ETN as well.
I've got a question for you on Swift. So Swift is interesting to me, and we've talked about what an elite offense it is. The role is good. He's clearly the 1A, but like this week, there were spots, especially in the first half, as I was watching this game as a very interested, had lots of Eagles all over all my entire fantasy portfolio between Best Ball, Dog Bowl, DFS, what have you. And I just found myself getting so frustrated watching Kenny Gainwell, who to me, this is probably biased because I had everyone but Kenny Gainwell, and it was very vivid to me watching how shitty he looked. But does Kenny Gainwell look worse than previous years Kenny Gainwell has looked? Because I feel like in past years it always was, Gainwell doesn't get a ton of opportunities, but he always looks good with what he gets, but the team doesn't involve him a ton. And we like Gainwell, the team likes Gainwell. For me, watching the first half of this game, I felt like every time Gainwell touched the ball, it was like, why did we waste a play on this? This was stupid.
Right. You have an all-star level talented offense, like truly offensive line, quarterback, receivers, tight end, DeAndre Swift, and I agree with your assessment that he's not up to their caliber. He's maybe it's more obvious than previous years because of the surrounding talent. Now, obviously, a lot of these are returning players, but I would say that Swift is better than Miles Sanders. So maybe the comparison there is tougher on him.
That's fair. That might be
but he
a reason.
Definitely hasn't played well. Gainwell has not played well.
And so what I want to know is, and this is, we're going to start getting into having to make assumptions about rational coaching, which is always dangerous. Are the Eagles going to see what we're seeing and say, gosh, Kenny, we love you. You're our guy. We're going to have you, take some snaps, but is his opportunity could we see Swift's opportunity increase is really what I'm asking, because that's what I'm interested in.
Right. I think that's what we should see. But I don't know. Like what I get sort of caught up on is that the coaching staffs frequently have a guy where they just trust when he's in there that he's not going to screw up in some monumental way, that the stuff that they're looking at, like, oh, he's running the right route. Oh, he's got his blitz pickup stuff on point. Nobody has to remind them what the play is as they're breaking the huddle. Like, and stuff like that, where it's like stuff that we don't care about, that maybe it feels like maybe he's the type of guy that might be doing that quite well. And when the offense is rolling, that like it's not like a pain point. But at the same time, I do think it's true that somebody who is playing inefficiently and not particularly well amongst better players, that like them keeping their opportunity shares is always going to be fragile, because it just takes somebody else to keep playing well. It just takes one play or one game where or two games where it's like, okay, we just can't do this anymore. We need to change things up a bit. So I do think that there's definitely a chance where they take the ball from Gainwell, but it's a bit hard when the team is this good. It's harder for me to be confident about it.
So here's a question I've got going forward. So we talked about how Javonte may be earning more opportunity going forward, and we're not entirely sure. We think Swift should earn more opportunity, but you see Javonte's in that cluster there with Darrell Henderson and Chuba Hubbard and David Montgomery right there in that 10 to 15 expected fantasy points band. I would assume that we could certainly see him moving up into that 15 to 20 range. Now, who do you prefer rest of season, knowing, the trend that we're seeing with Javonte versus Swift, where it's a little ambiguous if he's going to get more work or not, but he's already in that 15 to 20 point threshold. Do you have a strong lean one way or another between Javonte or Swift rest of season?
I think I still would be Swift, because you're talking about somebody with they're already getting the role that we'd like to see for Javonte. And so we're doing a little bit of projection here with Javonte, and you don't have to do that for Swift. You just like that's the amount of snaps that he plays. Those are the opportunities that he gets. And then when you sort of point out that the Eagles' offense is much better, that's helpful. Somebody might say, well, Jalen Hurts steals these touchdowns with the tush push and whatnot, but that's already factored in the expected points that Swift is not getting. Even despite that, he's still getting your 15 to 20 expected points, and he's not coming off the ACL tear. I think I'm pretty strongly Swift over Javonte.
Yeah, I would be too. I thought it was a good point to compare as we talk about Javonte potentially trending up. One interesting aside regarding the tush push before we move on to the tight end chart here. I don't know if you saw that Washington figured out a counter to the tush push. I'm very curious to see if other teams pick up on this and are able to execute it the way that Washington did. But for anyone who didn't see that play, essentially what Washington did was they leaned into the strength of the tush push and said, we know that you can get lower than us. You can have the low. You can win low. Go ahead. And they sent defenders over the top to punch the ball out from Hurts up top. And where everyone on the Eagles is interested in getting as low as they possibly can get.
Right, low man wins.
Truly no one contesting defenders coming over the top. Then it's just a game of how many punches on that football can Jalen Hurts withstand? And then number two is, now that teams kind of have, this as an option to try and beat it, how many opportunities do you really want to give teams to just full on cock back and punch the shit out of your quarterback's arms and hand? Like if
Right.
I not, no one's out here, bounty gate hunting for, injuring players, but if I'm a defensive coordinator and I'm talking about how we're going to shut down the tush push, I'm like, if they're getting the touchdown from it, you make them pay. That hand better be swollen as shit when Jalen goes to the sideline if he doesn't fumble that ball,
Not everybody knows this. In my last year, when I lived in Ireland, I coached American football. My last year, I was a defensive coordinator, and maybe people are gonna be mad at me for saying this, but if a quarterback was running it, like that was the thing we always had to emphasize. If he's gonna run it, you have to hit the shit out of him. And so I think that's like just a basic sort of like maybe ugly side of football where it's just a basic principle. And I think that's a pretty interesting point. I hadn't seen that myself. I hadn't realized, but I definitely agree with you where that seems like a pretty effective counter. Jalen Hurts is a big boy, but at the same time, you want that throwing hand.
Don't matter how big or strong you are when another big strong man just smashes your hand. I mean, a football's hard. Football's a rock, basically. Like you get your hand smashed by another big ass man. That's not going to feel good. The other thing is too, like if a guy really gets over the pile and gets like a Palomalu style flying leap at it,
right?
You just put your face mask right on that, but like that's not a recipe that you want to run back a lot of times for your quarterback. So.
Right.
I'm putting a pin.
It's a vulnerability for the Eagles.
I want to watch it going forward. The Eagles did, of course, show a look that they are able to remain multiple from the tush push formation.
Right.
So love the game theory of that stuff.
Yeah.
Thought it was worth bringing up. All right, let's get into tight ends. Unless there was any other running back you wanted to go over.
Yeah, worth bringing up the Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet stuff, where I know they actually sort of split the snaps last week, but I do think it's also worth calling out that Kenneth Walker, he did have an injury going into the game, and I'd be extremely surprised if that 50-50 snap share continued going into next week. But it was something that sort of like was in the stats this week. And something to look at for going forward.
Yeah, for me, I would say the signal on that I'm taking away is the contingent value of Charbonnet is just still very strong, right?
Yeah, pretty fair. But again, it like I'm not saying it's the most likely outcome, but something to watch for.
Yeah,
where they become 50-50. That would be a worry for me. I don't want to see it happen. I don't think it'll happen, but again, it's something that happened that we're keeping an eye on. So yeah, let's take a look at our tight ends, and I'm going to zoom this out just a little bit. So we've got our tight end utilization and efficiency, and these are our starter tight ends. And with tight ends, the most important part is just that they're running a route on a really high percentage of their team's dropbacks, where they're not having to pass block a lot. They're not. Their team isn't rotating them out with another tight end or using other personnel, that they're just on the field running routes. And then the other part of it, and this is why we look at targets per run, is that they're an important part of their team's offense. So you can see Mark Andrews, he tops the route share. He has a targets per run of 20%. Love to see that. And then he has an ADOT of 8.3, which isn't the highest, but it's not your sort of typical like Evan Ingram 4-yard ADOT, your David Njoku 3.7. It's a respectable ADOT.
Yeah, I loved just the way that the chart shook out this week, because to me it really crystallized what everyone is as far as like where they fall in the tight end landscape and pecking order. And so I'm just going to kind of rapid fire and go through some of my takeaways that I had here. Like clearly number one is Travis Kelce. He's still got that elite role, 31% targets per route run. ADOT of 7.4, so not the deepest ADOT, but he's just so involved that it doesn't matter. He can get there on the raw volume. He still can deliver splash plays, like obviously elite. Then you've got the more consistent, more involved type of guys with lower ADOTs, as far as like you're still top strong tight ends. And that's Sam Laporta and TJ Hawkinson, both with identical 24% targets per route run, both with very similar ADOTs of 6.9 and 6.8. And I think it's really cool to see that, because you can kind of see the way that their production comes as well, is they have like that more consistent floor where that high targets per route run and lower ADOT, those guys are just involved more often. It's way harder for them to goose you. And then you move on to the other guys that are still in that, absolute top tier echelon of tight ends of Mark Andrews and George Kittle, where they've got slightly lower, but still very good targets per route run of 20 and 19%, deeper ADOTs than we're seeing on those TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, heavily involved, but more underneath type guys. And so these tight ends are the ones where when Andrews and Kittle have gotten there this season, they've done it in those big nuclear type splash weeks, right? Where they're having a big spike week and delivering that.
Right.
And so I thought that was really cool, just the way all these guys shook out. And then getting to that bottom. So I think calling those 5 tight end, those are very different than the rest of the tight ends that are available, for you to play in fantasy. It's those 5. And then for me, it's a clear tier break. And that next tier is Dallas Goedert, Evan Ingram, and Jake Ferguson, who you can also see. And for me, it's that Evan Ingram is the clear lead of that tier, with, again, a targets per route run that's going to be more similar to like a Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson. He's up at 22%, but he's also got that really low ADOT of 4.0. And Goddard and Ferguson both at 5.2, 5.3 ADOT, lower targets per route run of 17 and 18% respectively. And so for me, Dallas Goedert is just fancy Evan Ingram, but we were drafting Dallas Goedert, more aggressively there. And I had called out Evan Ingram as someone in a Discord channel mentioned, Evan Ingram was such a terrible pick in battle royales, and bad pick in the dog bowl because he was going 100% drafted, and there were other guys going undrafted, and he's the same thing as all these other guys. And for me, that was such a critical misunderstanding of what Evan Ingram is as far as his role, where it's, hey, Evan Ingram has enough opportunity in a week where he can deliver such a monster week compared to the guys that were going undrafted. I like Logan Thomas.
I'm just looking at the points.
Yeah, Logan Thomas, Dalton Schultz. I liked both of them for a dog bowl this week. But to say that these guys who are going, Logan Thomas was undrafted often, Dalton Schultz was drafted in most of them. But to say that Logan Thomas and Evan Ingram are similar and their ceiling is just you're missing a whole chunk of the right tail for Evan Ingram. And it was borne out this week in a rainy game where, maybe it could have been even better for him if not for the weather, but guy had 11 targets or something for 88 yards, and he didn't get in the end zone, and underdogs only half PPR, so it doesn't show up quite as much there. But
right.
I thought Evan Ingram was just such a smash
demonstration of the role.
Yeah, exactly. But I was so tickled when I looked at the chart of oh my gosh, it was the clearest tiers that you could possibly imagine for these guys. So that was fun.
So what do you think of Cole Kmet? Because it strikes me as being definitely a positive surprise, and where 20% targets per run, and he's running a good amount of routes that. Obviously, you never want to pay for a guy with that profile. You never want to overpay, because you're hitting the mid range, and the bottom can just fall out there. But that does seem interesting to me, where unless you have some of the guys that you mentioned there, you probably should be starting Cole Kmet.
Yeah, for me, the Cole Kmet stuff it's exactly what we saw with Cole Kmet last season, where it's did Cole Kmet have a big splash play or a touchdown? Was Cole Kmet inexplicably left wide open with no defender within 20 yards of him, it's a good Cole Kmet week. And so it's the same thing we saw last season from Cole Kmet. But the fact that that stuff just keeps happening to Cole Kmet isn't just an accident, right? Like there's something about Cole Kmet or the situation where it allows him to get, in a situation where there's no defender within 20 yards and he's scoring these big touchdowns. So
like his average expected point this year through 8 games, 7 games for him is at 12.1. And he's had like expected points of like 14.7, 19.9, 14.1, 16.7. Like that feels pretty good. Like that feels like more than okay. Well, he was wide open for a big touchdown, so he had a good week. Like that feels like when the offense is going, like he's a big part of it.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. Yeah, I might have been underselling him a little bit there. The way I would frame it and like an actionable takeaway I would try to have there is like, as far as, like if you got Cole Kmet in your season long league, like you're probably starting, like you're starting him, I guess. But like in best ball going forward, I feel like where Cole Kmet was going this year in like the 140s, right around there, like 12th round or so, that is kind of the sweet spot to where you probably don't feel quite as bad about taking tight ends, because a miss at that point in the draft doesn't hurt you so bad. And then for me, I think my biggest takeaway that I've got going forward is the strategy that got really heavily touted of, just take 3 or 4 tight ends with all of your last picks in best ball, isn't bad in the sense that there were lots of undervalued tight ends going in those last rounds. I don't think that is the best strategy, though, to employ if you truly are taking them as your last 3 or last 4 picks, because what you're giving up there is you're giving up some of these dart throws where, yes, this season they probably hit at a higher rate than they typically will, right? Where we get guys like Kyron Williams and Puka and, Jerome Ford with the injury and, Justice and Gus and all the, Josh Reynolds, like Kendrick Bourne. Oh, got to pour some out for Kendrick Bourne.
Are you saying that you do recommend the or you don't advise against just slamming tight end rounds 15 through 18?
What I'm saying is mixing in, I like take your last tight end in that spot, but I personally think that if you're a plugged in best ball drafter, you definitely have some dart throw guys, right? You know the guys that you're interested in mixing in at the end of drafts. And if you're taking tight end for your last 3 picks, rounds 16 through 18, when are you taking your true dart throw actually off the board guy? Are you fading everyone in round 14, 15 to take your, Puka was going, undrafted around 18, but I just faded everyone in round 15, took Puka, and then took all my tight ends. What I think the correct way to play it is have your set of dart throw guys that you want to mix in at the end. Know how many of them you really want to have per team. If you're really confident that you're strong with your dart throws, maybe you are doing 2 per team and they're your 17th and 18th round picks. Maybe you only got, risk tolerance for 1. But I think using the late round tight end as a risk tolerance slider is probably the proper way to do it. And so you can mix a Cole Kmet in there in the 12th or 13th round and say, I got a better chance of this guy having upside than a Hunter Henry. Like cost adjusted, Cole Kmet versus Hunter Henry, the correct play is probably Hunter Henry in a vacuum when you're just looking at the tight end position. But when you're looking at it holistically from the point of your entire roster and what you're giving up at other positions by only selecting tight end in the last 3 rounds, I do think that kind of thinking of the tight end in the last rounds as your risk tolerance slider for taking a swing and a miss type dart throw player is the way that I'm going to do it going forward. I know that was a lot of rambling. I hope I explained that well.
My big thing is that the tight end, especially the tight ends that go rounds 15 through 18, they do tend to be sort of like lower upside players as well. And what you'll get is one of those guys will hit and they'll be a good pick, but you're sort of looking at and especially in that range, you're looking at players that aren't certain to be starters in bad offenses, or players that are like probably backups, in maybe slightly better offenses. I actually think we should move on from this discussion. Maybe we're getting too far from.
We're gonna get off in the weeds there.
Yeah. So yeah, we talked about Cole Kmet, Connor Hayward. That's not a name I was expecting to see. What is going on there? So
I believe that
plays for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I was going to say taking advantage of the Pat Freiermuth injury there. Sorry, all the Darnell Washington truthers, but
10.6 expected points last week, but prior to that, pretty low. So he is the starter in Pittsburgh, but not a particularly valuable role. And when it's not Freiermuth, it doesn't matter. Probably a showdown consideration only, really. Or would you disagree?
No, yeah, I'm not. I did see someone take Connor Hayward in a dog bowl draft, and I was like, that is a little off the board even for me. But yeah, not a click I'm making.
Kyle Pitts, right beside Jonnu Smith in route participation. That's starting to feel pretty bad. Where like some of the underlying metrics that we're sort of happy with on Kyle Pitts and sort of pointed to the breakout, that if they're sliding back a bit, that's getting pretty alarming. That's like, okay, not only you're scoring not scoring points, your underlying stats are getting worse too.
Yeah, it's moving in the other direction, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to me, because early the hypothesis was maybe Pitts is still coming off the injury and he's not totally right, but he was running more routes then when that was the theory. And so
his route share has gone down. He's been demoted essentially.
Yeah, it feels tired to do the shit on Arthur Smith thing. But man, I think that it's not as hard. The game isn't quite as hard as he thinks it is. He's like, if I don't involve Michael Pruitt or Van Jefferson, teams are going to be able to predict what I can do. To which I would say, if you just run out shitty players all the time, it doesn't matter if they know or don't know what you're going to do. Your players can't make the requisite plays. So, like, congratulations being unpredictably shitty, I guess.
So, first 4 games of the year, Kyle Pitts had an average route participation of 89%. Last 4 games, 66%. So, they've changed the offense there. I don't know if I think you can feel pretty good. A lot of people are there already. I think you can feel pretty good about benching Kyle Pitts in redraft stuff. If you've got a real option there, maybe not if your options are bad, but if you've got someone like Laporta or even Cole Kmet, you should probably be starting Cole Kmet over Kyle Pitts.
Kyle Pitts or Logan Thomas.
Oh my God. I think it's probably Logan Thomas.
Yeah, it is.
If healthy and he's starting, it's probably Logan Thomas.
Yeah, which is just so gross. It's just, man,
it's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we called he's on the next chart, but we called what's his I'm actually gonna just move us on to the next chart. We called Trey McBride. I think you pointed him as a potential top 5 tight end rest of the year. He's well on his way there now.
Trey McBride's doing his best Jake Ferguson impression, creeping his way onto the starter chart. Obviously, with this being the rolling 4 weeks and Zach Ertz only recently being added to IR, we're seeing Trey McBride's snaps not accurately reflecting what his real role is going forward here. But 27% targets per route run, good ADOT. I know some of it was garbage time. He's he's like king garbage time. But guess what? Garbage time points still count, baby. So
right. Yeah, it doesn't matter if that's where they get their points. That's where they get their points.
Yeah.
So another one that called out Michael Mayer. Now last week, obviously the game last night was abysmal. That like the Raiders just played awful overall. But Michael Mayer 79% route share. So he's like, if that continues, he's the starter. He's the starting tight end. We like Michael Mayer, so that feels pretty strongly positive to me.
Yeah,
even if the offense is bad.
I would say for all the positives of his route share increasing, I'm pulling up the Raiders' schedule. I guess thankfully they've got the Giants, Dolphins, and Vikings as 3 of their games that are coming up. They get the Chiefs twice, and they do have the Chargers. So yeah, they have 4 games where they're going to go against pretty poor defenses. They also get the Colts, so make that 5 really poor defenses they'll get to play against.
And he's now a starting tight end when you were getting him extremely cheap. We were dropping him. So you've either like got him off waivers or you drafted him cheap. Like I honestly think when it's that cheap and you're talking about somebody becoming a starter, like the matchup it becomes less important. I don't know if I'd be drafting him in Dogbo. Like you're the sort of Dogbo expert.
I would not. And it's for me it's that the ceiling because I need an undrafted tight end. I almost feel like I need a little more. I need them to separate or not get gapped for them to be someone I'm really excited about in Dog Bowl. And for Michael Mayer, I need minimum a touchdown and probably like 70 yards to feel really good about the play. And while the role looks right,
that feels pretty possible.
Yeah, for the role, you're not wrong. I'm spooked from what we saw from Jimmy. Like the vibes are bad for the Raiders, man, and this might be
the vibes are pretty bad for the Raiders.
This might be overreaction, but
I remember early in the year, people were like, "What idiots faded Davante Adams because of their quarterback," and now like the same people are like, "Please trade Davante Adams. Please trade Davante Adams."
Yeah,
it's, but at the same time, I don't want to overreact to like an island game either, where. There have been games where the Raiders have been okay, and maybe I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth.
I'm really scared that the train might just be a runaway train at this point. And
yeah, the horses have bolted the barn.
I don't know that they can get let's just say hypothetically the Raiders drop a game to the Giants next week, or they're not on bye. Raiders drop a game to the Giants. And then drop another game to the Raiders, and then they're heading into Miami, followed by the Chiefs.
Right, and they get fucking butt whipped. Davante Adams is just like sitting at home, arms folded.
Like, can't you, man? And I wasn't like full on team fade Davante. I think I came like a little. I'm probably like field neutral on Davante,
Right.
But I wasn't fully bought into the. The Raiders are going to be so bad it's going to crush Davante. It's like, I don't know that it matters that much. I'm like, in my mind's eye, I'm seeing it pretty clear here where after the Chiefs game, when the Raiders lose in the first ever 100-point loss, where the Chiefs put up like 103 and the Raiders, like, can't you just see this just being an absolute all-time meltdown type of team? The vibes feel so bad.
I think that's possible. And I don't believe in McDaniels as a coach.
Me neither.
So I feel pretty confident that he's a bad coach.
So for Michael Mayer,
they have had good games.
To turn this into an actionable team. To turn it into something actionable for Michael Mayer, if you're in a season-long league where you got to choose to start him, is he someone where you think it's safe to say you want to wait to play it until you see it again?
Yeah. Like you need to be in a bad situation. You need to be down bad to be starting Michael Mayer tight end. He's a better than a desperation play. There's meat on the bone, okay. But you're feeling pretty shaky about starting him. Like you don't feel good about it.
Yeah. Any other backup tight ends we need to spend time on here?
No, I think we can move on from the backup tight end chart. And so now you made us put Ceedee Lamb on the thumbnail. He has risen from the dead. Please tell us about Ceedee Lamb.
This was what I thought was. I mean, I guess I'm a couple weeks late, but I called this out earlier in my infamous mushing of the Cowboys week, where I just killed all Cowboys production and got them blown out by the Cardinals. But I truly see this as like, this is the hallmark of the Mike McCarthy offense. I don't know how to do very much, but I do know to throw it to the wide receiver one, like a la Jordy Nelson, a la Devontae Adams. Like, hey, has anyone tried this throw it to the good wide receiver thing? Like, and so coming off of a bye week, perhaps doing a little self-scouting, realizing like, oh yeah, Michael Gallup and Brandon Cooks suck. Like, neither of these guys are doing anything for us. And so we just have to throw it to Ceedee Lamb. I think that was what we were seeing here, was the Mike McCarthy.
Just to be in still in actionable mode, do you think Ceedee Lamb going forward, is he someone where the weekly floor is kind of low because he's sporadically targeted, or do you think this is a wake up call for the Cowboys and he goes back to being like heavily targeted and he's like a very strong fantasy producer almost every game the rest of the way?
I would say the real, and this is such a cop-out answer, I think the real truth lies right in between those two, where he might, because of how poor the offense has looked on certain occasions, you've always got to keep that in the range for the Cowboys. They can come out and do Cowboys things, and Ceedee Lamb is just going to hurt you that week. But I also think that they are now aware. There have been a couple games now. There have been 2 games where Ceedee has just gotten an absurd amount of targets.
We're past the point of we like throwing to tight ends as well, but you're a little bit nervous about the offensive environment as a whole. That like maybe they have their suck out weeks.
Yeah, and their schedule going forward is better than it has been previously this season. So I'd say in general, I'm more bullish on Ceedee going forward, but I don't want to get ahead of myself and get out over my skis.
Okay. So other things I think we need to talk about is how are we playing this sort of Vikings situation now that Kirk Cousins is out? Is like Justin Jefferson, is he a trade candidate, or is he a trade away? Do we still like Addison?
Regarding the Justin Jefferson trade away, for me, it's probably like the way that I approach leagues where you can trade is if this is a thing where you care about winning. If you care about winning in this league, this is a market-based game, and the only way to truly know what transactions you should be making is to know every price in the market. And so the correct way to play in a league where you can trade is you need to be talking to all 11 other managers every single day, testing the market on every single player on your roster that you'd be willing to move and every single player on their roster that they might be willing to move. And that's like so crazy.
Job.
Yeah, so crazy over the top. But like if you want to win, that is the correct way to play a market-based game. You need to know the market.
Right. If it was $1 million league, that would be like or even like $10,000 league.
Yeah, if it's a thing where the pride matters substantially to you or the money matters substantially to you, you need to be grinding to the fucking nub in the trade streets, because to make this about Justin Jefferson, I don't know if it's a good trade or not, because it really depends on how your league mates perceive him. If they're willing to pay old Justin Jefferson prices and you can get a true haul for him, then yeah, I love offloading the uncertainty and that risk and just, in a straight redraft, no keeper league saying, hey, whatever, this volatility is for someone else to embrace. I'm going to take more known commodities here and try and take this value and convert it into something that has a little less risk on it. And then
so just to hone in like and really and maybe drill in on the usability too. So obviously we're price sensitive on Justin Jefferson. I think that makes sense, but then I guess more directly, how much are we docking the Vikings pass catchers for this move from Kirk Cousins, great fantasy friendly quarterback, to Dobbs? It's a hard question.
So what I would say is and this is not an apples to apples thing at all, but let's think about what the Cardinals looked like with Dobbs, right? Like, were they able to have usable weeks from guys? Absolutely. The consistency was something where it was, you're a little less able to rely on it. And so what I would say is, Jefferson's ceiling certainly takes a hit, because I just don't think that, look at like Marquise Brown is great wide receiver, good NFL player, but just in that offense, it was really hard for him to put up elite numbers. And obviously Justin Jefferson is a better player than Marquise Brown, but I think that we'll see Jefferson come down. I mean, maybe more in the, gosh, it feels really gross to like, because I feel like I'm picking an arbitrary point, a watermark of where he'll fall to, but maybe more in line with like Amon-Ra or Keenan going forward. And it's just like the combination of QB talent and wide receiver talent, where those wide receivers have better quarterbacks and Justin Jefferson's a better receiver talent. It kind of, they meet in the middle around there. I don't know. It's
that makes sense. And so when Kirk Cousins was initially injured, I sort of remembered back to the last time he didn't play, and the offense was awful. It was just god awful, and I was like, oh, is that what we're gonna see again? And so I think Dobbs is a competent quarterback. One thing that sort of like makes me feel a little bit better about Dobbs is that he did sort of like, I think for the expectations that were fair for that offense going in, he did help them exceed. He did help the offense play better. Whereas, like, I feel like an offense where the main receiver is Hollywood Brown, and they're having to treat him like an alpha, and he's getting 25% target share, and he's getting like the alpha sort of targets where it's not sort of deep shot stuff. And then you're talking about Zach Ertz, you're talking about Michael Wilson, and like, oh, what about Rondale Moore? I feel like he is sort of like a net out of the quarterback, or at least that's what my sense is based on his play so far. And I think you have to consider it a clear downgrade just because Kirk Cousins is so helpful for fantasy. But and maybe this is me going on a limb and admittedly tough question, and I don't have all the answers, but I do wonder if things for that offense are maybe not as bad as they could have been when Kirk Cousins went down.
Yeah,
and like maybe he's like, maybe Jefferson is still in the Stephon Diggs range.
I think that's like an optimistic outlook, right? Because
it is. For sure.
Couldn't he also be in the Devontae Adams range? Where all of a sudden the offense goes from functional to non-functional. The offense wasn't good outside of the passing game, right? Like the run game wasn't very good,
right?
And so I don't know. But with how uncertain both of us are, I think to take it back to the are you trading Justin Jefferson thing, it just really highlights to me where if you can get anything close to what Justin Jefferson was worth, you just do it because of the uncertainty. Because like the bad outcomes are they're like, you're now dead. Your league is it's all over for you. And so it's just like, let's try and offload some of that risk, because I think one thing that we can say with relative confidence is that it's not Justin Jefferson's not going to come back from IR and just keep doing Justin Jefferson things without Kirk Cousins, right? Like he'll still be good, but it's not going to be he's a lock for 150 every week, right?
Right. Yeah, no way.
Yeah. Feel yucky talking about it.
Yeah, it's tough for sure. And I accept that I'm probably more on the optimistic side where like I think maybe Dobbs is a little bit better than maybe there's a chance he's league average, but I accept that like given sort of like long-term thinking and he's a long-term journeyman, that probably is a little bit optimistic based on a couple of games for the Cardinals. And in terms of how do you play him in DFS, how do you play Jordan Addison in DFS? Yeah, it probably is like a situation where if someone's like, oh no, I can't play Jordan Addison, and Jordan Addison just falls all the way down and he's among the last drafted peak players, like you're probably very interested in Addison then, but you do need a discount from where he was going before.
Yeah, and in games like DFS or Battle Royales or Dog Bowl, where there's, the prizes are very top heavy and you're very incentivized to take on risk and be contrarian against the market, I'm definitely the kind of guy that likes to play things before I see them in those types of contests. Oh man, it would feel so hard to click Jordan Addison, before you've seen that it's going to be okay for Jordan Addison, without Kirk Cousins. That
even in let's say the Dog Bowl, where do you think he should be undrafted, or what round do you think he should be in?
Let's see. Are the Vikings? Let's pull this.
Are they on the? Yeah, good question.
Are they on the main slate? We got Vikings Falcons. Yeah, on the main slate. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is. I mean, like potential slow pace game with. It's because I don't think Dobbs is starting, right? Dobbs isn't starting.
No, he's not. The rookie, unknown rookie is starting this week.
So, oh God. So look, like yes, if Addison's going in now, for me, I need him going undrafted. Like he can't be going last round and owned in 100% of drafts. That takes a lot of the mustard off the fastball, so to speak. I need him undrafted, so I'm getting him at, the field gets all the players at 8 1/3% in the Dog Bowl. I need Jordan Addison to be 2%, 3%, so that when I get a Jordan Addison hit, instead of playing against 400 teams, I'm playing against 200 or even 100 teams. If I get a sub 1% Jordan Addison and I'm playing against 50 teams, I'm cooking with some serious gas when he hits, right? Like you get a Jordan Addison 2 touchdown game and you got 50 Jordan Addison teams you're playing against. That's the kind of spot that I'm looking for. Right. Thank you. You gave me enough courage now to be willing to click him if he goes undrafted. But just how much it took me to get there and how gross that felt, I think is indicative of why the play becomes good, right? It has to be just that gross and bad feeling for it to become a good play and get to that undrafted.
Yeah, especially with the unknown rookie, because that it could, especially this week, it could be awful.
Yeah, but you can get, and this was why I played a little bit of Hopkins last week. Unfortunately, didn't get enough of him. I told you this in our group chat. I mentioned for a lot of my dart throws in the Dog Bowl that go undrafted, I put them in a list. I throw them all in my queue. I go to random.org and I randomize for however many. If I got 3 in there, I randomize 1 to 3, and whatever order they're in, I take the number, right? And so I kept having Hopkins in there. Is Hopkins, Kendrick Bourne, a couple other guys that I really liked that went undrafted. And every time random.org would select someone other than Hopkins, I was like, whew, dodged another Hopkins share. Oh, my good fortune was smiling upon me there. I didn't have to click DeAndre Hopkins. And so I got him on 2 teams with how the randomness gods let it shake out. And I was so sad thinking back to all those teams that just if it had broken another way. So this is to say that it can go that way. Those rookie quarterbacks where it's entirely unknown, a lot of input volatility. Those are spots that can be worth attacking, provided that it sets up right and you're in those top heavy type of contests. We did spend a lot of time on just a couple receivers, but it was a situation that I think was really important to parse.
Yeah.
I've got 2 guys, 3 more guys total. One is a team situation level thing, and the other is elite regression candidate. I'm going to just blurb the regression guy really quick because we've talked about him before, but it's Chris Olave. So what I was doing to start this season with DFS was I will play Breece Hall every week. I don't care. I'm going to play him every week because I know that eventually he's going to get there, and I'm just trying to be a week early, right? I'm playing it before I see it. I'm at that point now with Chris Olave for the rest of the season for DFS because I feel like he's burned people enough and he's still getting crazy air yards and the schedule is good. I will play Chris Olave every week until he makes me money for the rest of the season. So that's my quick blurb there. For the team level thing, very, very, very concerned about fantasy usefulness for Seahawks passing game because Jake Bobo is the bane of your existence as a Seahawks, passing game investor. If you have Tyler Lockett, you have DK Metcalf, you have JSN. The bad news is that Jake Bobo turned it into a 4-man party. And I'm really concerned that just for all of these guys, you're just going to be stuck in the spot where all 4 of them have their usefulness reduced. So I'm a little scared there. Am I overreacting to Jake Bobo?
So are we overreacting to Bobo? Yeah. I guess the big thing that it comes down to is there enough? Because obviously he's sort of like a part-time starter. So I have to see what actually his root share is. And so Jake Bobo week 8. I'm sorry.
You're fine. I'll vamp while you find the Jake Bobo stats. Because for me, just from watching the games, what Jake Bobo feels like to me is it reminds me of how that gross tight end rotation happens in Seattle, where it's like, man, there's points that happen to this tight end position, but I just can't pin down who it is. And Jake Bobo feels like an extension of that into the
All right, I'm gonna read out the Jake Bobo stats, such as they are. So week 6, his route share is 31%. Week 7 with DK Metcalf, it's 86%. Week 8, DK Metcalf back, it's 26%. So I think he's definitely much more of a part-time player. Now his targets per out run, he can definitely get targets. So like for example, he's getting like I think it's a little bit overblown. Like other than week 7, you're talking like 2 targets, and he's also having games where he's not targeted at all. So he wasn't targeted in week 4, week 5.
So the Jake Bobo touchdown vividness that I'm falling victim to this last week, you're saying don't worry about it. The Seahawks passing game options are going to be fine. Jake Bobo is not going to come steal your candy.
Yeah, I don't think he's the bogeyman.
Very good. All right,
let's a Halloween team.
Let's hit the next wide receiver chart here. We didn't
one thing actually. I before we move on, Pickens with Diontae back, it looks like very much back to his old role. His targets per out run way down. He did get the touchdown, but very little by the way of yardage, very little by the way of targets. and Diontae Johnson just a volume machine once again. So really disappointing there for how good he looked with Diontae out. But I do, and maybe it's still something to monitor going forward, but I am pretty concerned with the collapse there after Diontae coming back, like sort of fully healthy.
That's a good call. For me, it's more monitor, put a pin in it, and see. But yeah,
right.
Definitely.
It's one game. Don't overreact.
Yeah.
But pretty upsetting to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're moving on to the Tyreek Hill chart.
And look at that. DeAndre Hopkins, with just one game, has moved out of his candidate for positive regression into guy who has just had positive regression affect him.
Right.
And you know what's funny? I think Gretsch might have pointed, or was it? I believe it was Pat actually pointed this out with respect to Lamar Jackson, where these guys that are candidates for positive regression, it doesn't necessarily have to happen like slow and steady, like, oh, and all of a sudden Lamar just chips it away.
Right.
He had 6 good games in a row, and now he's back to where he should be. It can happen in these big explosive efficiency type games like we saw for Hopkins and we saw for Lamar 2 weeks ago. And so that's why successfully identifying these positive regression candidates can be so helpful, because when it hits, it can hit in such a outsized way. And so can I bring to you 2 very gross regression candidates here, and you tell me which one you prefer going forward?
Okay.
Christian Watson and T. Higgins, who both are right about 60% weighted targets per route run. Higgins getting a little bit higher route share than Christian Watson. Which do you prefer going forward?
I mean, easily T. Higgins, because I think you did have concerns with Joe Burrow and the injury. Looks like he's fully healthy now, and we've seen the big T. Higgins games where Jamar Chase is clearly the preferred, like he is the first receiving option, but you still get those big T. Higgins explosion games. I guess on the other hand, Watson is a speed demon, and he's definitely had those games where he's just off to the races. But we were talking about earlier where Packers not an attractive offense, and the long-term data on Watson is not great. He was a pretty mediocre college player, to be honest. It took him till like his 5th year to really smash. And yeah, in situations like that, the good rookie year in limited sample size, the fact that he's not a good college player is really important context. So talent better T. Higgins, team better T. Higgins, quarterback better T. Higgins.
Yep, that makes sense to me. For the just to take one quick detour on the Christian Watson thing, for guys like that where they didn't produce in college, but they're these freak athletes, I think you can almost chalk that up as more of a negative than a positive, because it's this guy had all of the physical gifts and he still couldn't beat guys who, eventually are going to be bagging Safeway groceries, right? So just something to look out for when you get prospects like that. He's certainly looking closer to the Martavis Bryant career arc than or the Chase Claypool career arc, right? JSN finally made it up to this chart, getting a higher route share. He's still down in the milk carton corner, but he's trending in the right direction. So will be interesting to see if he can fight off the Bobo monster and earn more opportunity in the face of Lockett and Metcalf.
Not a great game for him last week. Just 4 targets. He did get the touchdown, but
outside of the touchdown though, didn't do
nothing there. His route share was back down to 64%, not heavily targeted, literally just a touchdown. So that's a bit concerning, and we'll be keeping an eye on it next week for sure.
Kendrick Bourne, Viking funeral, torn ACL. Really sad. He was the only serviceable receiver in that offense. So now you got Pop Douglas or Demario Douglas.
Right.
And I mean, like, if there was any way for the Taekwon truthers to get there, like the path has been cleared as clear as it can get for Taekwon.
Yeah.
So if Taekwon doesn't happen,
he's undraftable next year.
Yeah, all the Taekwon slappies, myself included, should be shamed for their Taekwon bags.
So let's move on. So love seeing Tank Dell, Rashee Rice, up here. I don't know if there's like those are guys we talked about before. Is there anybody here we haven't talked about before, sort of standing out to you?
No, I mean, I was interested in Jalen Hyatt before we got the Tyrod Taylor rib injury, so he's still just like a wait and see. Jalen Hyatt's like, it seems like the classic kind of rookie that does something randomly in the fantasy playoff, catches 2 long touchdowns for 22 points or something crazy like that in fantasy playoffs, and everyone goes crazy over it.
Right.
But no, otherwise, I mean, like, gosh, is there anyone on this chart where you're even like outside of like those top quadrant guys? Like, I mean, even Nick Westbrook-Akini is not even rosterable, but like Jaden Reed, Rashee Rice, Curtis Samuel, Tank Dell. Is there anyone else? I mean, we talked about Demario Douglas very briefly, that he's probably the best candidate to, maybe vacuum up a little bit of the opportunity from Kendrick Bourne. But
no, these are all gross, aren't they?
Yeah, none of it.
Pure gross.
Can't roster any of them, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've had our graduates from the chart. I think Rashee Rice is trending to be a graduate from the chart. Tank Dell
100%.
is Zay Jones, when healthy, should be. But I think we've sort of, like, barring injuries, we've sort of like found the players who are playing well enough to become starters, and everyone else is sort of a marginal player.
Two quick points. We did see Quentin Johnston finally get targets and like production in an NFL game. So that was like very small signs of life for Quentin Johnston. He doesn't get like the full zombie resurrection rise from the dead like our thumbnail cover boy Ceedee Lamb did. But like, if anything, Quentin Johnston is scratching from inside the coffin. You can hear the fingernails on the coffin.
Targets, not bad. 50 yards and no touchdowns, obviously. But
it did require
2/3 of the routes.
It required Josh Palmer to re-aggravate his knee for that to happen. But who knows? Yeah. And then the last guy,
he's purely contingent, unfortunately.
The last guy I had anything noteworthy on this chart was Curtis Samuel. And I'm looking at this more as a like an offensive trend / signal to pay attention to. So Samuel left the game with injury. He was questionable coming into the week. And I was looking at that as maybe this is a week where Logan Thomas gets more involved, as the Eagles have, pretty ferocious pass rush. The last time the Commanders saw the Eagles, they gave up a ton of sacks, and with Samuel not able to operate in, that shorter gadgety kind of role where he's been getting some of those type of targets, maybe we'd see Logan Thomas fill in for that. When Curtis Samuel was actually ruled out, we saw Jahan Dotson finally get some more opportunity. We also saw, what's Dusty old? He was a Bills receiver Jamison Crowder. Saw Jamison Crowder have a game. And so for me, what I see this as is, with the absurd amount of pass volume that Washington team is able to generate, and I could see that number staying high and potentially even increasing with their trades to get rid of 2 defensive pieces here at the deadline. Their defense should be worse. Their offense has shown they're down to pass. And so I would say when Curtis Samuel is in and fully healthy, you're less excited about, basically anyone other than Terry McLaurin. But when Curtis Samuel is out, there's just so much opportunity there that's when you get guys like Dotson being more attractive potentially. That was kind of my takeaway.
Right.
You think that might be a little too just jumping to conclusions after 1 week, or?
Well, you get somebody who gets tired out of the game, then obviously it has to condense, and that's sort of what you need for Dotson. But doesn't feel great for Dotson that like that's what's blocking him, Curtis Samuel. But obviously good to know that there is some potential upside there still for Dotson. I saw this note here on Bateman. I actually I'm looking at the data here. I can't agree with this. Where yes, he had like a 63% route share, which is actually pretty good. Like he's gone back to being sort of like a quasi starter, but he only had 10% targets per route run, and 2 targets on a good amount of routes on 20 routes. So he did. I guess he did well with the 2 targets, but I don't know. I feel like unless there is more going on with the injury than we know, and maybe there is that unless Bateman has some injury that he can suddenly kick, that the data has just been consistently that he's not been good, and I'm sort of ready to bury Bateman.
Yeah, I am as well. For me, the Bateman stuff is for me as a heavy Bateman drafter, it's mostly copium at this point. I'm just very glad that I diversified and picked Zay Flowers some of the times when I wanted to click Bateman, right. And that's my saving grace that I kept clicking both of them. So for every Bateman, there's a Flowers.
Yeah. So I think we're done then, right?
I think that does it. I think that wraps up our Halloween episode. Very, very.
We had a positive regression to the mean on runtime for Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. But maybe we can trend closer to that 2-hour mark going forward. We'll see next week. But for those of you that made it through the entire 2.25 hours here with us, we appreciate you and your viewership. Hope you found some actionable takeaways from today. And until next Tuesday at 5:00, good luck this week, everyone, and we will see you then.
See you next week, everyone.